When I first went south my first year, I remember very clearly. I left from Annapolis. Whoops, there we go. I left from Annapolis, and I was really unsure about what I was doing. I'd done a fair amount of cruising in the Great Lakes, but I'd never done anything as extensive as an 1,100-mile trip down the coast of the eastern United States. And the biggest thing was I didn't know what I didn't know, and that made it difficult. And for that reason, I didn't even know the questions to ask. Now, this was back in 2001, 2002. So of course we didn't have Facebook. We didn't have Facebook back then. We didn't have YouTube. We had to depend on other sailors to tell us what was going on. I hate to sound like this. It sounds like I'm an old guy, and I am. But in any event, we just didn't have the resources that are available today, and the assistance. And it's become much simpler for that reason. We have much better tools, such as apps that give you tide and current, apps that give you the weather. We have YouTube for questions. We have really good resources online and groups that you can ask questions of if you're coming to a particular area. None of this was available then, but what I'm going to try and do is give you the basic information over the next 4 weeks, so that more than anything else, you'll know the questions to ask. Even if you're not sure the answers, at least you'll know when there's a question to be asked, which I think is one of the most important things. So with no more ado, I'm going to flip through to my presentation here. Bear with me while I hook it up. Can everybody see the screen? Does everybody just give me a thumbs up or something? You can see the Sail to the Sun logo. Just a quick little plug here. Sail to the Sun is a rally that I've been doing now for 10 years. I bring a group of boaters from Hampton, Virginia, down to Miami. We take 2 months to do it. The event has been called a 2-month-long floating party, and I'm very proud of that because people have a lot of fun. But the goal is to get everybody down there safely and comfortably, and and minimize the hassles that are involved in doing a long trip like that. So if you've ever considered going south and have wondered about a good way to do it, Sail to the Sun is I think the best way to do it. Okay, so if you have questions, text to 443-852-9649. The number's in the chat box. You can also text me via Messenger if you're on Facebook and you have the Messenger. And if I can't get to the questions in the course of our time here, I'll certainly answer it later on. You can also email me directly at wally@sailtothesun.com. Okay, so this seminar is called The First Timer's Guide to the ICW. And I like to start this off with a reminder to people, and this is especially to the men in the group, okay? Cruising is supposed to be fun. It's not a challenge. It's not a race. It's not a competition to see how fast you can get south. The idea is to, bear with me a second. I'm having a technical problem. Don't you just love computers? Whoop, okay. Okay, the point is that you're supposed to be having fun. So take the time to enjoy your trip and to enjoy your partner. That means that you want to schedule a marina day every week to 10 days if you're anchoring out more than not. You're going to need to relax anyway. You're going to have to do laundry. You'll have some boat chores, and you'll want to avoid any bad weather that might be coming up. So you can get off the boat and you can take a break and go exploring, chase a frisbee, chase a dog, chase your wife, go shelling, whatever. There's lots to do. But the point is to have a plan, not a schedule. Whereas, as one friend of mine told me one time, he says, I don't even have a schedule. He said, I have intentions. Oh, bear with me. We've had somebody just tried to sign in. Whoops. Okay. Okay, bear with me a moment, folks. We're having some technical problems here. Okay, back again. Okay, as I said, basically said, I just have intentions, and that's a smart way to go because you never know when something's going to happen, whether weather's going to come up, whether you're going to have a boat problem, whatever, and you don't want to overstress yourself by pushing. Take your time and make it enjoyable because that's what it's supposed to be. Okay, maybe there's really two things I need to remind you about. Most of the time when I give this seminar, the people I'm talking to, cruising is brand new to them. So until you understand what your cruising requirements actually are, you don't want to go about spending a lot of money on stuff you may or may not need. For example, solar panels. You're not going to need solar panels on your trip down the ICW. But on your trip down the ICW, you're going to get a sense of what your actual power requirements are. And once you get down south to Florida, where solar panels are usually cheaper anyway, you can then make your purchase and you'll have the knowledge you need to make the right decision. Plus, you'll have had a chance to talk to other cruisers about what they've done on their boat to make to make their cruising more enjoyable with the equipment they've bought. Okay, so what is the ICW exactly? It's 1,095 statute miles. It's mostly rivers, canals, bays, and channels, and they're very largely protected from the Atlantic Ocean. It starts at mile 0 in Norfolk. It actually goes further north than that, but the section we're talking about starts at mile 0 in Norfolk, and it ends at mile 1,095 in Miami, Florida, although the actual ICW goes all the way around the west coast of Florida and all the way to Brownsville, Texas. Lots of great cruising, lots of really great anchorages, and lots of friendly towns and villages. And a lot of the U.S. history occurred on, of course, on the East Coast. So if you're a history buff, it's one place. It's like living in a history book almost. A lot of people see the ICW as a purgatory or something they have to endure to get south. And hopefully by the end of this seminar, and when you do the ICW, you'll find that it's as enjoyable a passage as I've found it, having done it almost 50 times now. Okay, this is just a quick chartlet of the upper half, the upper 2/3 of the ICW. And if you look, you can see that the route is almost entirely inside the barrier islands and such that are along the coast, so that you're always protected from the Atlantic Ocean. Now, I'm not sure if any of you are in the Great Lakes. We'll go through this section anyway. If you're coming from the Great Lakes, from Lake Ontario, you'll enter the Erie Canal via Oswego, New York, or Lake Champlain, and move on to the Erie Barge Canal. If you're in Lakes Erie, Huron, Michigan, and Superior, then you can probably come in via Tonawanda, New York to the Erie Barge Canal. Now, you could also come south via the St. Lawrence Seaway, but for a first trip, I don't recommend it. The canal, it's easy, it's inexpensive, and it's actually one of the best parts of the trip, although it's sometimes a little hard to believe. Okay. Getting things here. Sorry about that. Okay. Now, for the sailors, I'm presuming we're all sailors here. For powerboaters, I apologize. You're just going to have to bear with this for a little bit. Don't wait until you're underway to learn how to step and unstep your mast to do the Erie Canal. You make it a point of helping other sailors at your marina on the spring and fall commissioning, or the spring commissioning and the fall haul out, and learn while you're working on their boats. Make sure that you take lots of digital photos and notes about your rig, because you're not going to remember that mess of wires and lines when it comes time to put the mast back up. If you've got any new gear, install it while the mast is down. Inspect your antenna, inspect the blocks and such. Make sure that everything's ship-shape. You're looking for any rust, any cracks, any wear or damage on the mast and on the mast gear. So you want to inspect the standing rigging, the tangs, and the chain plates. Check the spreaders. I did this one time when the mast was down, and the pin that holds the spreader to the mast had come about a third of the way out, and had I kept going, it would have come all the way out, and the spreader would have come down, possibly endangering the mast. So it's the kind of thing you want to look for and make sure that everything's ship-shape on the mast. If you bought new spreader boots, this is the time, obviously, to put them on. The other thing is, when you take your mast down, make sure that your furler is very, very well supported and tied off to the mast. Make sure that you tape or tie off any turnbuckles or any other equipment that can fall off. This hardware is extremely expensive to replace, and you don't want to ask how I know that. Okay, so where to step or unstep if you're coming from the Great Lakes? Marlin Marina in Port Colborne. You can also dismast at Tonawanda at RCR Yachts. If you're coming from further west, you might want to do this at Port Dover. If you're leaving via Oswego, you can cross the Lake Ontario with your mast down, or you can lower it on the south side of the lake. You have Oswego Marina, and you've also got Sodas Point. And when to bring your mast back up, I usually go to Castleton on Hudson and the Albany River. The reason I do that, it's a boat club. They've got their own mast crane, and it's possible to do it much less expensively. When you go to a marina to have this done down at the south end, you're going to pay several $100s at least per mast. At Castleton and Hudson, the other fun part is whenever you help the guy in front of you, the guy behind you helps you, and then everybody takes off to the pub for a brew. Okay. The other thing is that when you strap your mast down to the deck, it's very important that you don't just strap it down to the deck, from left and right. You've also got to strap it forward and back as if you're springing your boat. And the reason for this is that as you go through the water, even with small wavelets, your boat is going to be doing this kind of thing in the water. And what that does is the mast is very heavy, of course, it's creating a back and forth motion. And it may only be a millimeter, but as it continues, it starts to loosen up your lines. So spring the mast back and forth so it can't go forward and back. And every morning before you set out, make sure that you check the lines to make sure that they're tight. There's no worse feeling than crossing something like the eastern half of Lake Erie on your way to Tonawanda and suddenly realizing that your mast has come loose and is shaking back and forth in the waves. Okay, this is the Erie Barge Canal. It's typically what you see right here, very calm, very protected, and not very wide. That's one of the locks on the right-hand side. And the lock, you get free dockage at nearly every place you stop. Lots of scenic towns and villages to visit. I typically, you can do the canal in, if you really push, you can do the entire canal in 6 or 7 days. I typically try and take about 2 weeks to do it just because I want to stop and visit at the different places along the way. The lock tenders are extremely helpful. In fact, when you're crossing, you'll find that diesel fuel is difficult to get. You can only find it in the middle of Lake Oneida usually. But the lock tenders will usually, if you ask them, give you a ride to a gas station with a couple of jerry jugs to get more fuel. The highest lock is 41 feet, which if you've come through the Welland Canal will seem like nothing. And the going east is, of course, mostly downlocking, so it's much easier than coming back west. Now, a couple tips for the Erie Canal. Make sure that you bring gloves because by the time you go through the fall, the lines are quite slimy. There we go. That's better. Make sure you got some boat hooks or some very sturdy poles to fend off the walls. The locks are not particularly turbulent, and if you tell the lockmaster that it's your first trip through, he'll give you an easier ride by controlling the water more. You'll find mostly free tie-ups and free electricity and water at most of the locks and most of the docks in the towns. There's one place where you can even get free laundry, and you can tell when you're there because the places, all the boats on the wall are from the single guys who can't get their own laundry done. Now, when you fender your boat, make sure that you fender your boat very carefully so that you don't scrape up against the lock walls, obviously. You can use old rubber tires if you want, and if you use rubber tires, duct tape them to keep the water out of the tires because they get very, very heavy, and also keep your hull clean. If you have fender covers on your fenders, remove them because what happens is they pick up the dirt and the grit on the lock wall, and they will scrape the heck out of your gel coat. So make sure that you remove those. If you're coming into a lock and the wind is behind you, remove your Dodger window because what happens is the Dodger acts like a parachute. If a puff of wind comes up behind you, it'll twist you sideways in the lock. That happened to me one time, and it was extremely embarrassing. Fortunately, my boat is not so long that it endangered the ends of my boat by banging against the lock walls. But again, this is just something you want to be aware of. Now, the Hudson River, when you get there, it's very, very scenic. It is tidal waters right from when you leave the last lock at Albany. You'll find that anchorages and marinas are very easily reached, and there's lots of great cruising all the way down. One thing that I like to mention is that when you get into most of us are Great Lakes sailors on our first trip. What you want to do is when you get into the Albany, there's lots of current, lots of tide. As you're going down, once you're in a wide, clear section, start doing figure eights with your boat, with the current and against the current, and then try backing your boat up in reverse against the current and with the current. Learn how your boat handles under the current when you've got like 100 yards in every side to make mistakes and nothing that you can hit. And the reason you want to do this as soon as possible is because when you come to that first dock, you want to be comfortable docking. And remember, typically you dock into whichever is the most powerful, wind or current. If you're going to anchor, take a look at how the boats are anchored, what direction they're in, and then come up in that direction so that you're working with the current or with the wind, whichever is, as I said, more powerful. Okay, when you get to New York is incredibly hectic, especially when you're new at this. It's almost frightening. Lots of fast-moving traffic, and I strongly recommend that you do not go through New York City at night. I've done it twice, and both times it was intimidating. And I mean, I've got a lot of experience, and I'm a, having been a charter captain and delivery captain, and I found it a bit intimidating. You can anchor near the Statue of Liberty as long as you're no closer than, I believe, it's 75 yards from it. There's also moorings at the 79th Street Marina, and there are marinas on both sides of the river. Now, when you're leaving New York, what you want to do is start about an hour after the tide starts to ebb at your location. And the reason you do this is you want that current to help you get out into the Atlantic and move you south as quickly as possible. Okay. Oh, okay. Now, New York to Cape May is 115 nautical miles. You can do it in one big jump as an overnight passage, or you can do it in 2 or 3 days harbor hopping, going to Barnegat, Manasquan, Atlantic City, and then Cape May. You want to pick your weather because the inlets are absolutely impassable in bad weather. So if you're coming into a situation where the tide's running out, you've got some strong northeast or easterly winds coming in, you don't even want to try getting into one of these inlets. They heap up huge waves with a wind against current situation. They can be actually quite dangerous. Okay, I'm not trying to scare anybody. I'm just trying to warn you what you're coming up against. When you get past Cape May to the Delaware Bay and Delaware River, you want to make sure that you use the incoming tide to make your way upriver because it's a very powerful current. Typically, that means leaving Cape May about a half an hour to an hour and a quarter after the tide shifts at the Cape May inlet to the Delaware River. If the wind is strongly out of the north, you don't want to go. And the reason for that is you're going to get that wind against current. You're just going to get pounded all the way up, and you're going to make very poor time. And the Delaware River is really not a place you want to anchor if you can avoid it. Now, you want to stay clear of large vessel traffic, and I'll return to this in a minute. So stay to the edge of the channel. There's at least 30 feet or more at the very edge of the channel. You could even go to the outside of the channel. It's perfectly safe because you've got lots of water there. Now, dealing with large vessel traffic, your big ships typically communicate and monitor VHF channels 16 and 13. So if you see a vessel and you're a little concerned about where it's going or where you are in relation to it, you can call them up, identify yourself, and identify your position in relation to the other vessels. So in my case, if I'm coming up the Delaware and I see a freighter coming up, I might say southbound freighter or outbound freighter. This is the red sailboat Gypsy Wind. I'm 500 yards off your port bow. I will, and then I might say, well, okay, I'm going to stay to the edge of the channel. I'm not going to cross. Or I might ask them a question if I'm wondering where they're going. Depends on the circumstances. This is where AIS comes in very, very handy, by the way, because AIS, of course, identifies the vessel that you're looking at. And when you call a vessel by name, so for example, if I say, this is Gypsy Wind hailing freighter Snow Goose, Snow Goose must by law respond to me. Whereas if you just call southbound freighter, the captain or the guy at the helm might not know exactly who you're referring to. Okay. Never ever cross in front. I shouldn't have to tell you this, and I probably don't, but I like to accentuate it. Never cross in front of a large vessel, always behind it, no matter how far away it is. Okay, you don't know that your engine's not going to quit. You don't know that the wind's not going to die. So plan crossing any river or creek or the path of a large vessel. Plan on crossing behind it. Don't assume, especially when you're on the ocean, that the larger vessel is going to see you. Okay, you're a very small dot in a very large ocean. If you see a tow, a barge in a tow, remember that there are tow cables that run out behind that barge. They often will sink down to the water level and below. Extremely dangerous. You never want to get in between a tow and its barge. Now, the other thing I was going to say is that at night, sometimes you'll see the towboat, but the lights on the barge are very, very dim and you may not see it. Assume if you, for any reason, you're traveling at night and you see a towboat, that there is something behind it. Okay, and don't immediately go in behind it. That's the safe thing to do. Now, if you need more instructions on how to deal with big boats, there's a book available on Amazon called How to Avoid Huge Ships. So, for example, they will give you excellent advice such as do not attempt to teleport through the ship, don't roll your boat over and play dead, and stuff like that. You know, the stuff that you really need to know, and I'm not going to get into. It's a fun book. If you get a chance to see it, it's worth picking up for the read. Okay, there is a lock situation with a small boat between a couple of big ones. And you can see just looking at it, the amount of current that's happening there. A lot of that current is being generated by the props of those big boats. And I can tell you, without seeing this as a video, that boat is having an extremely difficult time holding its position where it's at. Okay, you don't want to find yourself in that kind of a position. Whoop, there we go. See what happens there? That current blows him right sideways, and he can't control that. He can't stop that. So that's why you want to stay away from big boats, and you also want to be very aware of what the current is doing when you see it. Okay, once you get to the C&D Canal at the top of the Delaware River, the absolute worst of the trip is over. The C&D Canal, which is not really a canal, it's just a long channel running between the Delaware River and the Chesapeake Bay, is 45 nautical miles from Cape May. There's a marina in the canal, and there's another marina at Chesapeake City over to the call it the southern end. There's also an excellent anchorage there and a free dock. Once you get through the C&D, you want to explore the Chesapeake because it's really a great cruising area. Lots of great anchorages, lots of fun towns and villages. You've got Annapolis, you've got Baltimore with one of the loveliest harbors, downtown city harbors anywhere. St. Michael's, you've got Tangiers Island. Now, most people heading south are going to stop in Annapolis for the boat show, and they're going to want provision and to explore and enjoy the sailing capital. One of the things you want to check out, of course, is Davis's Pub for the crab cakes. Best crab cakes you'll find almost anywhere. At this point, you're 118 nautical miles away from Norfolk. Okay, now people are always asking me, what do I need to bring with me? But I think it's more important that we first explore what you don't need. Okay, this boat here, this picture was probably taken 25 years or so ago. This couple were on one of those Piver trimarans, and they were heading down to the Bahamas. I haven't seen them now in 20 years since they left. But they went to the local grocery store, and I swear they bought up everything in sight. They bought every paper towel, every roll of toilet paper. It was amazing the stuff they bought. And where on earth they put it on that boat, I have no idea. But they managed to load it all on. What you have to remember is that when you're going down the ICW, you're typically not more than, call it 25 miles from the next place you can provision. So you do not need to load your boat up with toilet paper and paper towels and soda and all these other things. And for the northerners among us, I'll call it pop. It's all about priorities, okay? If you're Canadian, make sure that you bring Alexander Keith's and you bring your Tim Hortons coffee. And if you're not Canadian, you won't know why those are important, so it doesn't matter. Okay, now one of the questions I get asked a lot about is provisioning. And the best advice I can have about provisioning, because it is so specific to each person and each couple, is you go to Google. And if you Google sailboat provisioning, you'll find you have 103,000 results as of the last time I checked. Or you can make it simple and you can go to theboatgalley.com. And if you're not a member of theboatgalley.com, I recommend that you sign up. Carolyn is one of the go-to people for learning about cruising and how to stock your boat. And she's got all kinds of other great information as well. A couple of things I like to mention: if you have lead acid batteries, make sure that you bring distilled water with you and that you check your batteries regularly. The reason for this is that you're running your boat a lot more, and make sure you check your oil more regularly as well. You're running your boat a lot more than you normally did in the summertime before you retired, before you headed south. So you're going to be charging more. That's going to be harder on the batteries. It's going to use up more oil, use up more water. So check these things at least every week. Once you, especially with the batteries, once you have been running for a month or so, you'll have an idea of how much water your batteries need on a regular basis. Okay, there's not a season yet that I haven't seen somebody arrive in Fort Lauderdale or Miami where they've destroyed their batteries because they didn't check the distilled water in it. If you have pets, especially when you go to the islands, make sure that you bring pet food with you. As far as insect repellent goes, I like to mention, those things, they call them pick coils. You can get them at the dollar store. They're just coils of this green stuff. That is the one thing that will take care of getting rid of no-see-ums. You take a chunk of that, and at sunset, you put it in your companionway, and you light it up, and it will keep the no-see-ums off your boat. Now, as I said, provisioning is not an issue anywhere on the ICW. Excuse me a second. I haven't done this for a while. My voice isn't up to it. Things like fuel, spare parts, and so on are easily available. A lot of the Napas that you'll see along the ICW in the stores in the towns along the ICW will have a marine section, and it's usually pretty well stocked. Some parts of Georgia and South Carolina, you may want to watch the distances between marinas for fuel if you have a small tank. For example, my tank is 20 gallons, so I know where I have to carry extra fuel and when I need to fuel up. Now, this year is going to be interesting for me because I've just changed engines and I've switched to a 3-cylinder from a 2-cylinder, and I don't know what the difference in mileage is going to be. So I'm going to be in the situation where I'm going to have to watch a little more carefully to make sure that I don't run out of fuel. In any event, marinas and anchorages are quite easily reached on the ICW. You'll have some short days because for example, when I leave where I am now, or when I leave where I am now going south, I would run to Beaufort, South Carolina, or North Carolina, pardon me. That's 4 hours, but I want to stop in Beaufort to explore there. Leaving Beaufort, I'll go to Southport. That's 3.5 hours. But from there, the next day, I'll do a full 8 days to get to the next location I want to be at. So some days you're going to have some short days. Others are going to be fairly long. If you get current against you, you could be looking at 9 or 10 hours. So you need to plan ahead. You need to look at what the tides and the currents are at your destination. And it's always wise to pick a bailout spot in case you can't quite get there. Maybe a bridge has failed to open or there's a problem there, something like that. So some of the things you should bring with you, bring along a handheld VHF. And the reason for a handheld VHF is for contacting bridges on the canal or bridges on the barge canal, for onshore crew communication, for backup in case your VHF radio should fail. Same thing with a handheld GPS. It's good for backup. And it's also handy to have with you when you go down the dinghy when you get to the islands for exploring. In terms of paper charts, on the ICW, you want Moeller's chart book. You want which is now Kettlewell's chart book. You want the companion guide, the old companion guide if you want. You also want Waterway guide. Your dinghy should be in good condition. It should have the required safety equipment, which includes, of course, oars and anchor, PFDs, the appropriate size, and also a sound generating instrument, even just a whistle is fine. You want to make sure that you've got a good, dependable outboard, and it should be sized appropriately to the dinghy. Make sure that it's tuned up, has a lanyard. For example, I believe in Florida now, if you don't have your lanyard around your wrist on an outboard, you can be charged. Make sure that you have a spare boat anchor, because in case you lose it, you're going to be glad you've got it. And also, if you decide that you're going to try Bahamian mooring with 2 anchors, obviously you're going to need the second one for that. PFDs, as I mentioned, the best quality that you can afford. Make sure that you include children's sizes if you're expecting grandchildren or young people to be with you. I'm hearing some background noise there. Could you make sure that your computer's muted? Thanks. Where was I? Okay, make sure that you have a spare depth sounder, and if you can make it a handheld, you'll find that's very, very convenient. And the reason for that is that if you should go aground, and I know we're all great sailors, we never go aground, but who am I kidding? Anyway, I just went aground a week ago. Anyway, if you're badly aground and you get out in the dinghy with a handheld depth sounder, and you can sound for the deep water in order to get yourself out. I mentioned work gloves, which are handy for anchoring, for dealing with the lock walls and around dock pilings. Now, some of the things you don't need on the ICW, although you may have them and you may need them once you get to the islands or once you get out in the ocean. You don't need an EPIRB, because really you're at the most usually 50 yards from shore. For the same reason, you don't need a life raft. You can get by without a chart plotter. I did my first 2 trips in the ICW using a paper chart with no chart plotters. You don't need radar, although it can be handy at times. And again, as I mentioned, you do not need excess spares or provisions. Now, the other thing I want to remind you of, and if you forget everything else you learn here, remember this one. Get yourself a towing package from either Boat US or Sea Tow. Get the unlimited option. It's $200 at the moment, okay? You may never need it, but if you do, you're going to be grateful you've got it. And you can save about 10% buying your towing package at the Annapolis Boat Show. Now, most of you, I imagine, have got boat insurance. Your boat insurance probably covers towing, but please remember this. Every time you get a tow through your boat insurance, they count that as a claim against your insurance, okay? And that can have ramifications in terms of the insurability of your boat. So keep that in mind. A towing package And if you have to choose between Boat US or Sea Tow, I strongly recommend Boat US. You can ask me the reasons for that another time. Not something I like to discuss publicly. Okay, the charts and guides. That's the Kettlewell chart book at the upper left-hand corner. If you can find the companion guidebook, which is the one in the middle and the top, that's the one you want. It has all the basic information, nothing extraneous. And then, of course, you want a copy of Waterway Guide. For the record, I used to write for Waterway Guide as one of their cruising editors, but I've used their books even before that time. They're indispensable when you're cruising. Okay, weather. Everybody wants to know about the weather. Weather is not a big deal on the ICW. The reason for that is that you're typically sheltered from the wave action. There's only a few places where weather's going to be any kind of a real issue, and that's typically in some of the big Georgia Sounds or on Albemarle Sound in North Carolina. And then that's get into a wind versus current situation. Some of the best sources for weather, NOAA.gov, your favorite internet channel. If you got single sideband, you can go to Chris Park. Then you've got all kinds of wind and waves, flow. The one I use now is windy.com. It's a really excellent app. It's available for your phone. It's available for your tablet. And you can also have it on your computer, on your laptop. Now, it has a lot of information packed into what's basically a small app. It has a number of different weather models, and the basic app is free. In the last 6 months or so, they've brought out a paid version, which gives you a lot more options. It's I think it's $19 a year, $18.99 or something a year. I haven't bought it yet. I plan to very shortly. But this is indispensable because it will give you your weather. It'll show you the wind direction. It'll show you thunderstorms. It'll show you pretty much anything you need to wave action, swell action. As you use it, you'll find more and more use for it. You can see in the bottom right corner of your screen the letters ECMWF. So you got ECMWF, you got GFS, NAM, ICON. There's more now. Those are your different weather models. And the weather models are important, and I'll get into that in another section of this seminar next week probably. But as I explain how to use these things. But Windy is an absolutely very necessary app. And you can see there how it works. You can see the wind direction is very visual. Okay, now everybody wonders about tides and currents. My favorite app for tides and currents is called My Tide Times Pro. And it has the logo that you see in the upper left there. It gives you current, it gives you tides, it gives you sunset, gives you moonrise, gives you all this stuff which is invaluable when you're cruising. Now, communications. Your primary communications tool, of course, is your VHF. It's good for emergencies. It's good for social networking, of course, when you're in the islands and you want to know where the best sundowner party is tonight. Your cell phone is fine within 5 miles of shore. It is not an emergency tool because, of course, let's say you're sinking and you see a boat several miles off. You don't know his phone number. You can't call him. A sat phone is, of course, expensive. It's more of an offshore tool. There are a lot of new options available, and it is an emergency tool. You don't see VoIP, voice over internet protocol, as much anymore. The two big names there were Skype and Vonage. It's inexpensive, obviously. It's location dependent. Single sideband and ham radio. Again, those are not as common anymore. The internet has really, and cellular service have really, really taken this area over. And as time goes on, Starlink, as more and more boaters get Starlink, that's going to be quite a game changer as well. And then, of course, email is available through internet, cafes, marinas, phones, satellites, and so on. Basically, communications changes rapidly, and you'll set yourself up according to your specific needs. You know, if you feel you need to talk to your grandchildren every other day or every day, you're going to want a different package than the guy who wants to hide from the IRS or whatever he's hiding from. Okay, one of the things you'll want is an internet antenna. Now, there's a variety of different brands available. The point of the antenna is it grabs a distant signal and it creates a usable signal within your boat. Now, one of the problems, of course, is encryption. A lot of the signals that you'll get from a marina or a waterside restaurant are going to be encrypted. Now, the way you deal with that in the restaurants is you go into the restaurant for lunch and you ask for the the password for their internet setup, and then you're able to use it while you're in the area. When you buy one of these, check on the customer service reputation of the company. And the reason for that is that when you're way off in the boonies somewhere, you want to make, and your internet antenna starts to give you trouble, you want to have a service rep who can solve the problem for you. Now, the ones, I believe all of them now create an in-boat hotspot. And what that means, of course, is that you can use not just your laptop, you can use your iPad, you can use your phone from the same internet signal. So very, very handy. Now, passing and being passed. Is anybody here a powerboater? Okay, I can't see everybody's face here, so I can't tell. We're, as sailors, we're used to getting waked. It's usually not pleasant. On the a narrow channel like the ICW, it can become even less pleasant. But what we have to remember is that we are probably 50% of the problem when we're getting waked real hard in some place like the ICW. And the reason for that is that we're motoring along, doing 5.5, 6.5, 7 knots. And the powerboat that wants to pass you cannot pass you at any speed less than 8 or 9 knots, which is where they throw up that humongous wake. We need to slow down to 3 knots or less, if you can, and let the powerboat get by us, and then swing in behind them as rapidly as possible so they can get back up to speed again. Now, what you want to do is if you see a boat coming up behind you, use your VHF to advise them that you're going to slow down. Just southbound powerboat at marker 47, southbound powerboat at marker 47. The red sailboat gypsy went in front of you. Once you get closer, I'm going to slow my boat down so that you can give me a slow pass. Most boaters on the ICW, most powerboaters will do this for you automatically, okay? Now, sometimes the professionals, the delivery captains, they'll come up behind you and they'll use the whistle system. One whistle means that the other vessel is passing you on his left, so he's altering course to starboard. 2 whistles means he's altering course to port and passing you on his right, which would be, of course, on your port side. If you get a whistle signal, you return the same whistle signal if you agree. Now, if you're going down the ICW and your intention is to turn, and that would be turning into him because he's passing you, then you return 5 rapid whistles, or you get in the VHF and you tell him, no, I'm about to turn. Please wait until I've completed my turn. Now, powerboaters, if we have any powerboaters here, you need to come down fully off plane to reduce your wake, not 7 miles an hour with a 1.5 foot wake behind you, down to dead burbling slow where you have no wake happening. You can resume your speed when the other boat is well past your vessel. Use your VHF because you're the guy who can see the boat name. We can't, in front of you, we can't see your boat name. Use your VHF to advise the boat in front of you of your intentions. Now, the best method is to learn what we call the fast pass method, okay? Now, as a sailor, I remember the first time somebody used the fast pass. I'm going down the ICW. I forget exactly where I was, somewhere in North Carolina. In fact, I think it was pretty close to where I am now. And I look behind me, and there's this powerboat about 45 feet. He's coming at me, and he's moving. He's really moving. He looks like he's the Titanic throwing a wake. And I'm thinking, if he goes by me like that, he's going to sink me. He's going to launch me into the trees beside this canal. I'm like, southbound powerboat. This is the red sailboat. Please slow down as you approach. Well, this guy just kept coming and coming and coming. I thought, I'm going to die. And then what he did was, just as he got up to my stern, he dropped the throttles down to nothing. And what happened is, his boat immediately sunk in the water, settled down flat in the water. It killed the wake, and his momentum pushed him past me with no wake. And he then hit the throttle again, and he was gone. So if you're a powerboater, you want to learn how to do that because it will save you time. Just remember, whether you're a powerboater or sailor, trawler, whether you're on your dinghy, you are responsible for your wake, and you're responsible for any damage it causes. And I have seen people get sued successfully, and I've seen captains lose their job because they were discourteous about their wakes. Okay, dinghies. The dinghy is your station wagon or your mom van or whatever you want to call it to do all the other stuff that you have to do: snorkeling, exploring, visiting other boats. If you have a problem with your boat, it can become your tow vehicle. You have 2 basic types. You have the inflatable that we're all used to, or you can have a rigid one, and there's a variety of rigid ones. I have an aluminum dinghy. You can have one like the Portland Pudgy that you see in the bottom right-hand corner of the picture. You can have a fiberglass like a Boston Whaler. There's all kinds of different ones. You can also get a sailing dinghy. You can get an inflatable with a hard bottom, of course. Make sure that you have the appropriate equipment as required by law. Think about what kind of a towing system you're going to use on your boat. Don't tow your motor on your dinghy, because all you need is somebody going past you with a big wake and your dinghy gets flipped and there goes your motor. And again, I've seen that happen. Consider the engine size. Some people are happy with the 2.5 horsepower and going putting along. But when you're in one of the big anchorages in the Bahamas, you might want a little bit more power so you're not stuck out there taking half a day to get across to the other side of the bay. Give some thought to dinghy security. You want to have a 15 or 20-foot stainless steel cord or chain with a good lock so you can lock it up when you feel you need to. And security on the ICW is generally not a problem. The only place where I've ever seen a dinghy stolen was in Miami Beach, in fact, which is no big surprise. Your engine size, I mentioned. Now, standing up, you'll see a lot of people stand up on their dinghies. This is an incredibly unsafe practice. These people are standing up and crossing there in Lupron in the Dominican Republic. Now, the problem with this is that if you hit a wave or if you lose your balance and you fall out, okay, first off, in Lupron, you don't want to fall out because there's no pump outs there. I don't want to get any more graphic than that, but it's not good water to fall into. Secondly, if you fall out, and I've seen this happen in the Bahamas, the dinghy spins around and it ultimately seems to come right back straight at you. So now you've got the outboard motor spinning like crazy. I've seen people get cut and injured, and you're doing this in waters that are shark filled. That's my analysis of standing up in the dinghy right there. Okay, boat security. In 20 years, I've had one instance where I was even mildly concerned. That was in Cuba, and I didn't even need to be concerned because of the circumstances. It was just the Guarda, the Cuban Coast Guard, coming out to check the boat at 10 o'clock at night because they hadn't checked it earlier. So it was a nothing. But in terms of personal and boat security, you want a good chain and a waterproof lock for your dinghy, or a long-coated flexible steel cable. Another way is to raise your boat your dinghy on the davits, or raise it from the boom, or keep it in nice and close to the boat. Some people want to carry guns. Guns can be problematical in most countries. The Bahamas, for example, you can only bring certain types of guns. If you bring 103 bullets, they'll count them, and you had better be leaving the country with 103 bullets, or you're going to have some splaining to do. Okay? A lot of other countries, you can't have a gun at all, and they will take it from you, and you'll have to return to that location to get the gun back down the road. What I do in terms of personal security, I keep a machete by the companionway. The machete, of course, is for opening coconuts, should that ever be necessary. A fire extinguisher can be a very excellent defensive weapon because a face full of fire extinguishing powder is going to discourage anybody who wants to board you. And for nighttime, 1 million or 2 million candle power light shone in somebody's eyes is going to keep them under control. Okay. So if you need legal means of self-defense, if you feel you need those are 3 items that you keep handy. As a general, and these rules don't apply on the ICW. They don't apply in the Bahamas. There are places in the Caribbean, the far eastern Caribbean, the far western Caribbean, where they might make sense. You want to anchor in company with others, because of course then you might help should you need it. The one thing I do mention: be cautious about alcohol in public, especially if you're in a city such as Nassau or Freeport, or of course any downtown city in North America, because staggering around, it just marks you as a target. But honestly, like I said, in 20 years I've never had a problem, and I don't know of anybody who has. So cruising is actually a very safe pastime. Now, one of my personal annoyances is dinghy dock etiquette. Okay, make sure that your painter is long enough. Now, if your dinghy's 10 feet long, you should have a 20-foot painter. And the reason for that, your dinghy can be pushed out a full dinghy length away from the dock if it's really crowded and somebody has to try and get their dinghy in. And never, for God's sake, at a public dinghy dock, if you've got a lock up, don't lock up so that you're jammed right up to the dock. Okay, that's just completely discourteous. It just shows that you're discourteous and you don't know what you're doing. So use a long painter and give some consideration to the other boaters who have to get ashore as well. Now, here's some of the signage that you see on the ICW. Notice the yellow triangle on that marker, and on this marker there's a yellow square. The yellow triangle and the yellow square are found only on the ICW route, and the triangle will always be on the north side, the starboard side, going south. Okay, so it'll be on the shoreward side. Now that changes in a couple of locations where, nope, I don't have it there. Sometimes you'll see like a square sign like that, but it'll have a yellow triangle. That means that you're on one of the major inlets, for example, Cape Fear, areas like that where the ICW matches up with an inlet. And what they've done is they've maintained the red to the right going inland, but they put the yellow signs on the opposite, the square and the triangle on the square. The reason they've done it that way is to tell you W. Okay, these mile markers have almost all disappeared now, but they're every 5. They used to be every 5 nautical miles, and they just tell you how far down the ICW you've come. The bridge clearance signs, most of the bridges will have one of these height boards like this. The standard height for a bridge in the ICW is 65 feet. There are several that are not quite at 65. Wilkerson, which is about 5 miles from where I am now, runs at 64 feet. And there's a couple of others that are further south that run anywhere between 64.5 and 65 feet. By and large, bridges aren't going to be a problem until your mast is over 64 feet, 3 inches roughly, okay? And then most of the time you're able to deal with it by watching the tide. When you're at low tide, you're going to be able to get through most of these bridges without any problem at all. Okay, this sign here is found on the rock pile near Myrtle Beach. It's a 3-mile section of the Myrtle Beach ICW where there are some rocks at the edge of the channel. Now, if you've ever sailed in Maine, or if you've ever sailed in the 30,000 Islands or the North Channel of Georgian Bay, this sign will make you laugh because it's, we know what rocks are up there. But anyway, it's something to be aware of. Okay, that's a sign you really want to pay attention to. That sign you'll find outside of Camp Lejeune, which is in North Carolina. It's a Marine base, and if you've ever, I've never been a military person, so the first time I heard artillery fire was in Swansboro, North Carolina, which is 12 miles from Camp Lejeune, and we could hear the artillery firing from there. It was amazing how loud it was. But anyway, there'll be a flashing light going on here, and usually the Marines will have picket boats out to make sure that you don't cross into the camp while they have live firing going on. Okay, as you're going south, the first place you'll come to will be Hampton when you leave Chesapeake Bay, or you may go a little further down south into Norfolk, which is where the ICW actually begins. Norfolk is the home of a major naval shipyard. You'll see all kinds of interesting vessels, on occasion even a submarine. Keep in mind that you have to stay well away from submarines. And if you get too close, they will come over and they will tell you to get lost. Excuse me. Anyway, once you come through Hampton and you cross onto the ICW, your first decision will be, am I taking the Dismal Swamp, or am I going by the Victoria Cut route through Great Bridge? There's pluses and minuses to both routes. I like the Dismal Swamp route, but the problem is the Dismal Swamp, if you're at or over 6 feet, you're going to be too deep to do it comfortably. Now, the entrance to the ICW can be a little intimidating. Most of these bridges are now up permanently, but pay attention to the online groups like Sailing and Cruising, Bob 423 and such, and Waterway Guide, and they'll tell you if there's any unexpected closures coming up. Going through Norfolk here, it's a very high traffic area. You want to be on the watch for other vessels. Again, monitor VHF channels 16 and 13 to see what's going on in case there's anything you need to know about. The bridge channel here is channel 13 until you get to South Carolina, Georgia, and Florida, where it switches to channel 9. Now, I mentioned big vessels before. I just wanted to go at this again. You can see the current behind that tugboat. Okay, that current, as you saw in that other boat, can push you 10, 15, 20 feet with no problem. What you want to do in a situation like this, which you'll come across at some point, don't attempt to pass. Contact the tugboat on channel 16 or 13 and ask them what you need to do to get through, and then follow their advice. Okay, so coming to the Albemarle Sound, after you've got through the Dismal Swamp or the Coinjock route, you're coming to the Albemarle Sound. If the wind is strong against you coming across the Albemarle Sound, if it's out of the south while you're going south, give some consideration to hanging out another day wherever you're at, because you get a real strong wind against tide chop there, and it makes it very, very unpleasant, especially for an underpowered sailboat. I've crossed the Albemarle Sound doing 2 knots, and it was not fun, I assure you. Once you come out of the Albemarle Sound, you come to the Alligator Pungo Canal. If there's been any storms ahead in the recent past, if you're falling behind a big boat, especially like a tugboat or a large powerboat, keep in mind that the props of these boats can pick up deadheads off the bottom, which you could possibly run into. So keep a watch out for things like deadheads. Powerboats need to keep a close watch, and they generally need to travel below planing speeds, because a powerboat hitting one of these things is going to lose a prop, destroy a shaft. That boat on the left here that you're going to see in just a second. Hello. There it is. That's a 52-foot Fairline. He was flying along the Alligator Pungo Canal, just past it actually, and full speed, throttles to the bottom. He hit a broken off piling. Probably what had happened was that the barge had gone by and snapped the piling. So it was broken off 6 or 8 inches below the 6 or 8 inches below the water surface. He put a 14-foot gouge in the boat, and it sank in less than a minute. And that was a $2 million boat that salvaged for $140,000, not even a year old. Okay, now we got to wait for this thing to go through. As you can see, one of the engines was tilted 90 degrees. Now, leaving the Alligator Pungo Canal, you actually can sail on the ICW. I often, even when I'm in the narrow sections of the ICW, I will often throw the Genoa out just to pick up a little extra speed or to help me against the current, whatever current I'm dealing with. Now, you've probably all read about the various trouble spots, and over the years they've changed. Lockwood's Folly can be a problem one year, and then it gets dredged, and it's not a problem. Shallot's Inlet, Little Mud River is an eternal problem. It still is. Hell's Gate was a problem, and it's been redredged. Hopefully that will last. Basically, local information asks the towing services on VHF channel 16. The marinas can give you an idea of what's coming ahead. The boaters that are coming in the opposite direction. Local fishermen. And again, of course, on the internet, Sailing and Cruising, Bob 423, Waterway Guide are good sources for information. Now, incidentally, I did not do that on the ICW. That happened to me in Cuba when I don't speak Spanish, and the guy who was giving me directions to get to the marina, I thought he told me to go right, and he told me to go left. So that's what happened. Anyway, I got the boat off the next day, the next high tide. Anyway, as I mentioned, waterwayguide.com and cruisersnet.net are good sources for ICW information. Now, people will ask me oftentimes, should I stay inside or should I go outside? The nice thing about the ICW is that you're protected from the weather. But if you've got a stretch of nice weather coming up and you want to jump offshore and make a little distance, remember that the distance from whatever anchorage or marina you're at to the sea buoy, south to your next inlet, and then into the next marina or anchorage means that typically passages that are less than 24 hours aren't really saving you any time or any distance. It's oftentimes faster to travel inside. Now, for the guys who are the real pure sailors, that's frustrating as the devil, and I know it is, but that's just the reality of the situation. Something to keep in mind, not all of the ICW inlets are passable in inclement weather. If you get, for example, Fort Pierce has a wicked current. If you have the current going out and you have an east wind coming in straight at it, you're going to get 2 and 3 foot waves basically standing there, just slamming your boat, making it a very, very rough go to get in. Are you properly equipped to do an outside passage? Do you have the proper charts, inlets for the inlets and for outside? Do you have the requisite experience to do this? My first time offshore, I did it with a buddy of mine by the name of Bob. He just finished doing a round the world trip. I met him in St. Augustine. We got yakking, and I'd never been offshore. I was going north, and he said, "Well, I'm going to jump offshore to Hilton Head." which is 127 miles. He says, why don't you come with me, get some experience? And I did that. And it was a real reassuring to have a competent, knowledgeable boater with me to do the trip. And that's a good way to get some learning in. If you're going to do an offshore jump, do it with another boater, so you've got some backup. Now, if you do choose to go outside, check the weather using several different sources. I've seen people who check the weather using just one source. That source happened to be wrong, and they had a very unpleasant passage. And that was in a 52-foot powerboat going to the Bahamas. They got beat up something fierce. Now, there are a series of free docks along the ICW. I'm not going to get into the particulars of them, but if you want to know about the free docks, there's a Facebook page done by my friend James Newsom. It's called facebook.com/ICW free docks. There's also a website called icwfreedocks.com. And he lists all of the various free docks and what their amenities are and what their restrictions are. Most of them, for example, don't allow you to stay on them overnight. Okay. To mention some of the places, you have Annapolis. In Annapolis, you'll want to go to the sailboat show, as we mentioned. You've got Ego Alley, Bacon's for used boat parts. You've got Back Creek, a great place to anchor. Davis's Pub, as I mentioned. This is the entrance to Annapolis here. As you're coming down, you come under the Bay Bridge, which you see in the upper right-hand corner, and then you just follow up, come around Greenberry Point, follow the markers, because there are areas that shoal out quite rapidly in there. And then depending on where you're going in Annapolis, whether you're going in Back Creek or whether you're going further up Seven River, you'd make that decision. Annapolis, you have mooring balls in the locations that I've shown you there. Mooring balls are first come, first served. There is a water taxi that runs during the show. It runs quite late. I'm not sure. It doesn't run 24 hours. I know that, but it runs from all the various anchorages, whether you're on the Eastport side or whether you're on the Spa Creek side. Now, Chesapeake Bay to the ICW, the yellow line that you see there is coming in from Chesapeake Bay. I typically follow the blue line and run up to Hampton. There's a lovely little anchorage there, and something that you don't find often on the ICW if you're anchoring out, a marina that will actually allow you to take a shower for $1. Most marinas don't allow that. If you want to skip Hampton, then you hang a left and follow the red line and go up to Hospital Point at mile 0, and you can anchor out there. There's also a free dock at Portsmouth if there's space available. Coin Jock, which is on the Great Bridge route. It has 2 marinas owned by the same person. There's no anchorage there until several miles past it. There's reasonable provisioning, and a lot of people like to stop here in Coin Jock because the one restaurant serves a really, really good roast beef dinner. And I mean, it really is that good. When you're docking here, watch for the current. The current will be with the wind. Now, if you do the Dismal Swamp, that's a picture of what the Dismal Swamp looks like on your right. Remember that if you're over 5 feet, give it some thought. If you're over 6 feet, then you're not taking it because it's simply too shallow for you. This picture is from Belhaven, which actually happens to be where I am now. And that is a picture of a sunset. Now, anybody who knows me will tell you that I don't take sunset pictures because I'm never awake before noon hour. That is a untruthful slander. That is, and when you get to Belhaven, you can check for yourself, that is a sunrise picture. Okay, the reason you do the ICW, another one of the reasons you do the ICW, you could go outside from Chesapeake Bay and come all the way around to Beaufort, North Carolina. But that's about a 240-mile trip, I believe it is. It's all offshore, and it goes through an area known as the Graveyard of the Atlantic. Especially in the fall and the winter, storms are quite frequent there because you have several currents that come in close and mix up. You have a cold current coming from the north. You have the Gulf Stream coming from the south, and you'll get very questionable weather in there, especially in the fall. Also, once you leave, you have no place to get in a sailboat until you get down to Beaufort, which is way down at the bottom area there. Okay, coming a little further south, Oriental Harbor, wonderful little town, Oriental. You have a harbor. There's a shoal in the middle of the harbor. It's usually marked with a twig. The shoal is made of Gorilla Glue, I'm sure, because anybody who ever gets stuck on it has to get towed off. I've never yet seen anybody wiggle off of it. There are 2 free docks there. One to your right-hand side as you come into the harbor. The other one straight ahead in front of the coffee shop, and you can stay for 48 hours on those docks. There are no amenities such as power and water for those docks, however. Now, Oriental is known as the sailing capital of North Carolina. If you dock at one of the free docks, you'll have people coming up and asking you where you're from, where you're going, what kind of boat do you have, what are your plans. They'll tell you about their own sailing adventures because the city has got 8,000 citizens and 3,000 boats. So that tells you that they're into sailing. I was there on New Year's Day one time, and most people on New Year's afternoon are watching football. In this town, they have a sailing regatta that goes on New Year's Day. So it's a fun place to visit. And they're big into dragons. If you're there for a parade, you'll have a great time because they just love parades. And there's the dragon right there. Beaufort, North Carolina. There are two ways to come down to Beaufort. One, you take what's known as the Russell Slough, which brings you right into downtown Beaufort. I'll come into more detail on this in another session a week or two from now. The other one is you continue running all the way down the ICW, and at that point you can either come around Radio Island from the south, or you can swing over into Morehead City and anchor out or grab a marina there. There's the Beaufort anchorage, as I mentioned. The nice thing about Beaufort, you can anchor there or you can tie up at one of the marinas. It's one of the nicest downtowns on the entire ICW. Gorgeous boardwalk, really fun place. I typically will spend 2 or 3 days here before moving on. If you're anchored out, you can often see the horses over on Radio Island. Okay, Swansboro. Swansboro was, I'd never stopped in Swansboro until one day I decided to anchor there. I couldn't get all the way to Beaufort. Got talking to a guy up in the bartender at the restaurant, and he suggested I bring the Sail to the Sun rally there that fall, and he started setting things up, and they threw a great party for us, and it's now become one of my favorite stops on the ICW. They have a city dock. There are 2 bars and pubs, or 2 bars and restaurants immediately off the city dock. Nice place to stay. The anchorage is pretty good. The holding is good, although it's got a very strong current. Wrightsville Beach. The thing about Wrightsville Beach when you're coming to Wrightsville Beach is to remember that the bridge immediately to the north of Wrightsville Bridge only opens on the hour. So you want to time, especially when you're going south, you want to time that carefully, because if you miss the 4 o'clock bridge, you're going to be going to anchor in the dark. Now, you'll notice on this this chart, it shows to be wary of shoaling. The shoaling there has gotten worse and requires dredging, and I don't see that dredging is scheduled for it. So if you draw 5 feet or more, again, you don't want to be coming through that at low tide. Instead, go all the way down another 1.5 miles down the ICW till you come to the next inlet, turn to port, and then come up and then go back up left to the anchorage. Snow's Cut. Snow's Cut leads into the Cape Fear River. You want to come into the Cape Fear River with the current ebbing, okay? The current is ferocious in the Cape Fear River, and if you're going down in a sailboat against the current, you're likely to be doing 3-4 knots at the most. On the other hand, if you've got the current behind you, you're going to find yourself flying along at 11, 12, and I think one of the boats in the rally hit 13.3 knots one time, and that was a 38 or 39-foot boat. So the current, as you can see, is really ferocious. Okay, Lockwood's Folly and Shallot's Inlet. They're due to be dredged this year. There won't be a problem this fall. But again, the situation changes fairly rapidly. As a rule of thumb for those 2 inlets, what you want to do is come along through them at about 50 feet off of the red markers to your right. Okay, that is usually where the deep water is. Even at low tide, there's typically enough water for a 5 to 6 foot boat to get through. If you want to avoid the fun, what you can do is from Southport, go offshore to Little River Inlet, which is a 26-mile run, and both inlets are nice and deep. For shoaling issue updates, waterwayguide.com, Bob423 on Facebook, Sailing and Cruising on Facebook, and Local Knowledge. Now, Cape Fear to Charleston, you can go offshore, like I said, do Southport to Little River and do 26 miles. You can do Southport to Winya Bay, which is 70 miles, 70 nautical miles, or you can do South. All of those are nice, easy routes. Charleston, before you get into Charleston Bay, make sure you've taken a good look at your chart and that you know the route you want to do. And the reason for that is that Charleston Bay can be very confusing when you get into it. Okay, like you've got freighters coming up and down, you've got ferries going up and down, you've got all kinds of sailboats and recreational craft. So make sure that you got your waypoints set on your chart plotter so you know where you're going. It's all deep water, but you want to know where you're going before you get there just to make it easier on yourself. Otherwise, it can be quite intimidating. Okay, Beaufort, South Carolina. Again, one of the nicest waterfronts in the south. There's a mooring field there. The marina is right downtown. You can anchor out just past the mooring field. You can also anchor out up on Ladies Island Marina up the way. If you need to provision, then I suggest the Ladies Island anchorage because it's within walking distance of the grocery stores. If you don't need to provision and you just want to explore a beautiful southern town, then I recommend the mooring field or the marina there. This is another place that has very strong currents. You want to, if you can, you want to leave on the outgoing tide. And the nice thing about it is that your next stop is probably going to be Hilton Head. So if you're leaving there, you're only a few hours from Hilton Head. You've generally got time to structure your trip out to take advantage of the current. Now, Hellgate, there's more than one Hellgate, of course. This is the one in Georgia. The thing about Hellgate is that it does, when you cross through Hellgate, and it's due for dredging as well, you are running at right angles to the current, which means that the current's going to be pushing you left or right. The key to not getting pushed out of the channel here is as you enter the channel, watch the markers, but look behind yourself and make sure that you're not getting pushed sideways. Okay. Typically, what will happen is come into the channel and you're going to have to crab your boat. So if you're trying to go straight, but you got the boat angled, 10 or 15 or 20 degrees, whatever it takes, to the right or the left of the channel, so that you're staying running in a straight line. Again, to make sure that you stay in a straight line, just look over your shoulder at the markers behind you and make sure that you're staying on that path that you want. Little Mud River has been an eternal problem. At low tide, Little Mud River shallows out to about 4 to 4.5 feet. At 1 hour past 5+ of water there, because you've got an 8-foot tide in the area. So the key to going through Little Mud River is like these little creeks that are all above to the north of Little Mud River. You can anchor in any one of those creeks. So if you get there too early and you've got a bad tide, anchor out for the night, and the next morning when the tide is 1/3 to 1/2 rising, just jump on and go across. You'll have at least 8 or 9 feet of water and no problem getting through. Something to remember is when you get down to the bottom here, the current, if it's coming in, is very strong. You want to make sure you go far enough out so you don't get pushed back onto that shoal that's there. Jekyll Creek is another problem area. I haven't heard that it's been scheduled for dredging this year. You want to be sure that you enter this at least 1/3 to 1/2 tide or better. And the reason for that is that it's shoaling out, and it's last time I went through, I dropped 5 feet, and I was a little over an hour or two out of low tide, and I was touching bottom. Now it's a real soft bottom. You're not going to damage your boat, but it's going to slow you down. Okay, running offshore from Royal Sound to St. John's Inlet can save you a considerable amount of time and distance because, of course, when you're on the ICW in South Carolina and Georgia, half the time you're going north, and the other half of the time you're going east or west. Okay, you're not really spending a lot of time going south because it's a very twisty, windy route. So if you want to jump offshore, there's all kinds of places you can jump offshore, and as you can see, there are inlets where you can come back inshore if you need to get off. Doing this is fine, but you're going to miss some of the most gorgeous parts of the ICW if you jump off of Georgia. Okay, a few pictures. That was me somewhere on the ICW. Some people hanging out on their boat, taking life easy. That's the old Indian River Fruit Company in Florida. Conking in the Bahamas. These are all things you'll get to see. Fernandina Beach, which is a really beautiful community in Florida. I had an unexpected visitor, difficult crew member down in Central Florida. New Year's Eve party in Beaufort. Oriental, that's the dock in Oriental I was telling you about. The crewmen are happy. Christmas time, going down the ICW. Goat Island in outside Charleston. The Welland Canal and one of the big freighters coming, the Alligator Pungo. That was in Chesapeake Bay. Wolf's forget the name of it, in Chesapeake Bay. And again, the Hudson River in New York. Sorry, I was a little louder than expected. Okay. So let me just close out the sharing and get back to the. Hello, are we there? Where are we here? There we go. Okay. So we're pretty much, that took a little longer than I anticipated. Do we have any questions, folks? No questions?
Yeah, I have a question. Can you hear me?
Hang on, having a hard time hearing you there. Let me turn up the volume. Again, sorry?
Yes, I have a question. Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now.
Okay.
Yes, I had my volume turned down.
Thank you. Your presentation was excellent. There's just so much information. So a couple of questions. After, there were some parts that you went just a little bit too fast that I wasn't able to read and understand everything. Is there possible that after this, I can replay your presentation?
I did happen to record it, and I will have a link for that on Sailing and Cruising probably later on this evening.
Okay, that's amazing.
You'll be able to watch again.
Okay, that'll be amazing. Thank you. It's possible then you may have answered my second question, but I'll ask it just in case not. You said several portions you could do outside in the ocean, but you said specifically the part from Norfolk to Beaufort, North Carolina. You called it the graveyard of the Atlantic or something like that, and you did not recommend it. Okay, so my question is, how long is that inside to do then via the intercoastal? How many days? How long would it take?
It depends on, like, if you're doing it fast on a delivery, it doesn't take long at all.
Right. So a range.
I've done as much as 80 miles in a day, which is a long, long day.
Yeah.
I aim for anywhere between 20 and 45 miles a day. And it really just depends on where I'm going. So, for example, you mentioned from Norfolk to Beaufort. Okay, from Norfolk to Beaufort, I would run from Norfolk to the Welcome Center in the Dismal Swamp Canal, or I would go to Chesapeake City. From there, I would go to Elizabeth City. From Elizabeth City, I would cross to the anchorage at the bottom of the Albemarle Sound, and from there I would come to Belhaven, where I am now, and then from here I would run to Beaufort. So what's that? 6 days?
5. Yeah, 5 days. I counted. That's 5.
Yeah. So and those runs will be anywhere from 15 or 20 miles to 50 miles, but the distance I've covered in total in those 5 days is 200 miles. So I'm averaging 40 miles a day.
Very perfect. Thank you for answering my question.
The key to it is like, don't push yourself to the point where you're getting frustrated and cranky. Not so much because you shouldn't be frustrated and cranky, but because your partner is really not going to appreciate it and is going to get really ticked and not enjoy the trip. And you want to avoid that. So, and if you ever find yourself getting really frustrated with cruising, you're cranky, or you're angry, or you're just not having a good time, the odds are really strong and you're pushing too hard. And that's the time when you need to slow down and take it easy. And that means just grab a marina or anchor somewhere and just chill for a day until you get over it. And trust me, I've been there. I know what it's like.
Right. You're reminding us that it's supposed to be fun.
You were listening. Yes, it's supposed to be fun. And it should always be fun. I've done this trip almost 50 times. I've had a good time every time. And I have always discovered new stuff. It has never been boring. And now the only problem is I know so many people along the ICW that anytime I stop, it's not for like overnight. It's usually 2 or 3 days to visit, explore, and have fun. So, that's my life on the ICW. No complaints. Do you have any other folks? Okay, as I said, the video will be available a bit later on tonight. It has to process, and then they send me a link to it. I'll put the link up on the Sailing and Cruising Facebook page. Thanks very much, everybody. We'll see you next Thursday. We'll be covering some more specifics, some of the apps that are necessary, some of the destinations, and a few other things that are going to be helpful. Thank you very much. Hope you had a good time. Bye now.